Hey everyone, I'm Allison Marsh watching NBC News Now. Here's what's happening. The VP is in Guatemala, her first foreign trip in office. The focus? Immigration.
Our world is interconnected and interdependent. And therefore, what happens abroad is of priority to the United States of America.
Another deadly shooting rocks southern Florida. 3 people killed at a graduation party. Police saying enough is enough.
This violence has to stop. This is extremely frustrating. Every weekend is the same thing, and we just got to band together.
And welcome, Wizards. We're going inside the new Harry Potter flagship in New York City. We start today with Vice President Harris's visit to Central America, her first international trip as VP. NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba is in Mexico City. Monica, the Vice President meeting with Guatemala's president today. How'd that go? And what's the White House doing to try to help fix this immigration crisis?
Well, symbolically, Allison, the vice president said she chose Guatemala as the first country she wanted to travel to because she does really, in her words, want to work on the root causes of migration, which in Guatemala are extremely complex, from the poverty to the violence to the corruption. So she addressed all of those issues and also pledged millions in aid to the Northern Triangle countries. But of course, she's not visiting Honduras or El Salvador, which have more corruption problems and more government schemes that they wanted to avoid on this trip, perhaps. Instead, coming to Guatemala, though, where the president himself has been accused of some issues, and both of them addressed that head on in a press conference, saying that the vice president had a very frank conversation with him, raised her concerns and dedication to anti-corruption as well, something the U.S. is trying to work on. Take a listen to how she framed this very complex issue.
The president and I agreed to continue our work to manage migration at Guatemala's northern and southern borders. We also discussed illicit drugs that are being smuggled and humans who are being trafficked across those borders, undermining the security of both the people of Guatemala and the people of the United States. Our nations have collaborated on these issues, and we will create a smuggling and human trafficking task force, which will work with local law enforcement to stop these crimes.
Those task forces really just an initial step, which is also how the vice president is viewing this whole trip, Allison. They're under no illusions that they're going to be able to solve this incredibly thorny issue just on a 48-hour trip. They believe this will be the first of many, and she will return to the region at some point later this year. Of course, we know this is only one of the things on her plate, but this was an important decision, and one we should also point out and remind people, this was then Vice President Joe Biden's homework assignment, too, given to him from then President Obama all those years ago, but it's not like things have improved since then, and that's something that the vice president's aides acknowledge as well. This will take years or decades to really stem the flow of migrants to the U.S.-Mexico border.
Monica, how about government corruption? It's a huge problem in Guatemala. What's the White House doing to try to solve that?
So they are absolutely raising this as a major issue, and it's not just in Guatemala, it's globally. The United States would like to see more countries tackle anti-corruption efforts. So this is something you saw the vice president reference, that task force. She said again that she raised this so emphatically because this is really kind of looming over the entire visit to Guatemala. And it's something that there's a lot of concern about because all of these millions of dollars in aid that is going to a country that, by the way, has been ravaged by hurricanes and other disasters, there is a lot of concern and fear by experts on the ground and in the region that that money isn't going to the right places. So they're going to try to do more to ensure that those funds can be applied, again, in the vice president's words, so that people are more motivated to stay in their home countries instead of making the treacherous journey up through Central America and Mexico to the border.
Monica, you're in Mexico City. The vice president gets there later tonight. What's she doing in that city tomorrow?
It will be similar to what we saw today in Guatemala. She's going to be meeting with the Mexican president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, in the presidential palace you see just behind me. And we should tell people and point out, this is the Zócalo. It's an iconic plaza here in Mexico City, in the capital. And usually it's full with people or with demonstrators. You usually see a ton of activity, but it's more closed down and barricaded today because just yesterday here in the country, we saw the midterm elections take place. So they wanted to be sure that security was properly ensured here, of course, ahead of the vice president's visit. She will arrive here tonight. She'll meet with the Mexican president. Then she's going to engage in a couple of different roundtables with different leaders. And she's also going to try to highlight empowering women and young people. That's another one of her main goals, in addition to deepening diplomatic ties and providing economic development to these countries and, of course, to our incredibly important neighbor to the south. Allison.
All right, Monica Alba in Mexico City, thank you so much. The White House says it can't solve complex immigration in just one trip. So what can the vice president accomplish in 48 hours? And what's a winning long-term strategy? Dan Restrepo, senior fellow at the Center for American Progress, joining me now. Dan, you wrote an op-ed for The Hill called Why Kamala Harris Should Push Constructive Disruption in Central America. In that piece, you say success will ultimately rest on the ability and the willingness of the United States government to constructively disrupt a failed status quo in the region and in the U.S. migration system itself. Can you tell us more about those failed systems and how the U.S. can constructively disrupt them?
Yeah, certainly. And when it comes to these countries, these economies in Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador are essentially rigged to benefit a very small number of people and to expel a significant portion of their population, essentially as an export crop. And you got to go after that. You got to go after these kind of closed economies that benefit a very small number of people. And the U.S. can do that in a combination of ways. One is anti-corruption, as you just were talking about. The U.S., the kind of the economic elites in these countries, the thing they perhaps fear the most is having to live, work, and do business only in their own countries. And access to the United States is an important thing for these folks who have rigged these systems to their own benefit. So the U.S. can and should use kind of the sanctioning system to send messages to these folks that they have to change the way they do business. Also, the way we deploy assistance. We have to be able to create greater opportunity, right? These are closed economies for the most part. So we have to use assistance to help create competition in these economies and work with the private sector, the U.S. companies who may be interested in investing in these countries, to do so in a very kind of coordinated way, to say to the governments and to the business elites in these countries that you've got to change your business practices if other folks are going to come invest.
Dan, you also say that the closer the vice president gets to the root causes, the more disruptive she'll need to be, the more challenging the work will be. What specifically can the vice president do? And look, we know this is just a short trip. How can she sort of lay the groundwork short term for maybe more long term progress?
It's a combination of things. And quite frankly, the vice president in the lead up to this trip did a series of things that I think make sense. One is making sure the U.S. government is coordinated so that our sanctions, our development, and our diplomacy are all aligned. And to make sure that we're sending consistent messages. Also engaging with folks who aren't just the governments in these countries. She had a meeting a couple of weeks back with people who had been prosecutors against corruption in the region, that the U.S. during the Trump administration turned their back on those folks and they had to flee Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. By lifting up these anti-corruption crusaders, I think she sends a pretty powerful message. She's meeting with civil society organizations today in Guatemala, also sends this inclusion message. It was one of the reasons people leave is they feel they don't have a voice in their own country. And the vice president, through her symbolic acts while she's on the ground, can start elevating those voices and making sure people feel like they're being heard. And then finally, addressing kind of the acute causes that people are leaving right now. To ramp up, as the administration has done, food assistance in the wake of two storms that kind of walloped the region in late November of last year, and to help deal with COVID and get vaccines downrange. Part of the announcement that the administration made last week was to prioritize the distribution of COVID vaccines in Latin America and the Caribbean, and quite frankly, starting with these countries.
Dan, the New York Times is reporting on how foreign aid from the U.S. to Central America isn't slowing migration. Here's a quote. Here in Guatemala, which has received more than $1.6 billion in American aid over the last decade, poverty rates have risen, malnutrition's become a national crisis, corruption is unbridled, and the country is sending more unaccompanied children to the United States than anywhere else in the world. What can the administration do to make sure the aid going to the region actually helps reduce the problems? Is it a matter of that's just not enough money to make a difference?
No, it's quite frankly not a question of money. It's, again, about using our political influence in these countries. The U.S. has an outsized amount of political influence in Central America, perhaps more than any other place on the planet. And it's using that to deliver the kinds of messages and sanction the kind of people that you need to go after. This is what I'm talking about with constructive disruption. People leaving, violence, lack of economic development, all of those are symptoms of this rigged system. So the U.S. needs to lean into disrupting that system and then also listen to the folks whose lives we're trying to improve on the ground. And again, inclusion matters here. Having an open conversation with civil society in these countries and people who are actually acting on the ground and working these problems on the ground is something that needs to be done more by USAID in Central America and, quite frankly, around the world, as was so well laid out in that New York Times article this weekend.
Dan, let's talk a little bit more about the intangibles, if you will. Vice President Harris saying the U.S. and Guatemala need to give migrants a sense of hope. Here she is this morning.
Hope does not exist by itself. It must be coupled with relationships of trust. It must be coupled with tangible outcomes in terms of what we do as leaders to convince people that there is a reason to be hopeful about their future and the future of their children.
So we've talked about some of the tangible actions the U.S. can take here, but how about some of those more intangibles, the emotional things like building hope and faith that there might be a better future?
But hope is built on tangible things, as the vice president points out. What is kind of, as I was talking about, this food assistance, vaccines, making a visible difference in a maximum number of people's lives on the ground right now. And things are so bad in Central America that we actually have a weird opportunity, if you will, to make that tangible difference now. Another thing that would create hope, and I was talking about disrupting our own immigration system. Right now, folks have only one way of legally entering the United States, and that is to physically present at the USMexico border and claim asylum. We need to open alternative pathways to migration. We don't need to create the legal ability for everyone who wants to migrate, but actually a small percentage. That sends a very powerful message to people that there are legal opportunities and that they can kind of plan against those over time. And then finally, what we've been talking about. Going after the corrupt system. So a lot of people who are leaving Honduras right now are leaving Honduras as a form of political protest. It's to send a message to perhaps the region's most corrupt government of their own failure. And so going after corruption is actually a tangible thing. It feels symbolic, but it's a tangible thing. And if people have hope that the political systems at least are under pressure from the United States, that may very well change their decisional criteria and affect people's decisions to migrate or not.
Dan, you said it. There's a really unique opportunity here, perhaps, to affect change. Thanks so much for coming on News Now to talk to us about the different ways the U.S. can try to do it. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
A different kind of family separation happening at the U.S.-Mexico border. Some migrant parents sending their kids alone into the U.S. because of the Biden administration's decision to allow unaccompanied minors to stay. NBC News correspondent Gabe Gutierrez is along the U.S.-Mexico border with more.
Allison, we're here in La Jolla, Texas, and behind me is a Texas National Guard vehicle. A short time ago, we actually saw Border Patrol agents rounding up and processing dozens of migrant parents as well as children, actually mostly women and children, not far from here. It's something we've been seeing over and over for the past few days, both migrants here on this side of the border, but also in Reynosa, Mexico, where there has been a bottleneck of families that have either been expelled back into Mexico after crossing crossing into the U.S. because of Title 42. Those are COVID protocols that are sending some of these migrant families back, but also other family members, parents making the agonizing decision to send their kids alone over the Rio Grande into the U.S. in the hopes that they'll be allowed to stay and reunite with other relatives around the country. Now, this is something that has been rising over the last couple of months. There were more than 178,000 migrants encountered by U.S. Border Patrol here along the border in April. That is the highest in 2 decades. Now, the number of migrant children, unaccompanied minors encountered at the border dropped slightly in April, but law enforcement officials we've spoken with here say that there continues to be an incredible number of migrants crossing over the U.S. border over the last couple of months, and it is only increasing as we head into the summer.
It's very dangerous. I mean, we've been out here for a few minutes. You can see how hot it is. So the humidity, it's going to continue to increase, and that's when you start seeing, unfortunately, a lot more fatalities because of the heat. You know, they experience dehydration, and who knows how long they've been out there in the brush. You can see the brush is very desolate, very thick, and this is where they have to come to in order to get to where they're trying to get to.
Temperatures here in La Jolla, Texas are in the 90s right now and expected to head into the triple digits in the heat index later on today. Now, Vice President Harris is dealing with this continuing humanitarian crisis here at the border and trying to stop the flow of migrants from Central America, of course, as she meets with leaders in Guatemala and Mexico earlier this week.
Many children start their long journey to the United States from some of the most remote areas of Guatemala. NBC News correspondent Carrie Sanders takes us inside some of those communities in Guatemala City.
To understand how children from Central America wind up on the U.S. border, we traveled high into Guatemala's mountain. On steep dirt roads, by motorcycle, on foot, to a spot only half a turn on a switchback from the Honduran border. It's here where so many desperate migrants, often children, begin their journey.
My name is Sofia Letona. My mission is to help in places where there's a humanitarian crisis.
We joined Sofia as she made health checks on newborns. Infant mortality in Guatemala is worse than in Syria.
I mean, they've seen their neighbors' children die of hunger. They don't want the same for the children. They're desperately looking for ways to get the children to have some food, to be healthy, to grow up, to have a chance at life.
Why the United States?
Because it's the dreamland, you know? It's the place where dreams are made of.
Sofia's rounds this day include a first-time meeting with 2-month-old Elsa. Elsa is 37-year-old mother Ordia Perez's 10th child. Guatemala's problems, like neighboring Honduras and El Salvador, are much deeper than simply hunger. 2 Category 4 hurricanes just weeks apart last year hammered the Central American Atlantic coast. State governments have done little to help victims rebuild. And then there's this systemic corruption and crime. At a refugee center in the capital city, we met Eric. He left Honduras to escape conscription into a gang. Here, he gets aid and comfort, but by law, the center cannot prevent anyone from heading to the United States.
You're 12 years old. Did you even tell your mother you were leaving?
No.
You did not tell your mother?
I called his grandfather in Atlanta, who told me he crossed into the United States without documentation and now lives in Atlanta. Eric tells me he wants to live with his grandfather and to work to send money back to his family still in Honduras. Remember, Eric is only 12 years old.
Are you going to make it?
That's a yes. Remember Elsa's mother with 10 children? She speaks the Mayan language Choti. I asked if she could ever imagine allowing her children go north alone.
I'm kind of shocked because she just said that maybe she would stay behind, but she would definitely send her kids.
She would send her kids?
She would get, she's just said, like, she would get used to the idea and send her kids.
Experts estimate 34 people leave Guatemala every day. That's Honduras right there, and over there, El Salvador. Collectively, as many as 700 people a week, all leaving. Destination, the United States.
Kerry Sanders, NBC News, in the Pamia Mountains, Guatemala.
Time to check in with NBC News Now correspondent Simone Boyce. She has the latest headlines for us from NBCnews.com. Hey, Simone, how you doing?
Hey, Allison, we're going to start with this. The Supreme Court declining to hear a lawsuit challenging a federal law requiring men, but not women, to register for the military draft. Now, the U.S. switched to an all-volunteer military force in 1973, but the law is still on the books and could be enforced during wartime. And switching gears here to some international news, France is fining Google $267 million for using its advertising to push users to its own services and discriminating against competitors. The tech giant responding by saying, quote, "We're committed to working collaboratively with regulators and investing in new products and technologies that give publishers more choice and better results when using our platforms." And in Arizona, 2 wildfires burning over 30,000 acres each over the weekend. The blazes triggering road closures and mandatory evacuations. The fires, which are only 2% contained, are getting fueled by blistering temperatures as well as an ongoing drought. And a train crash in Pakistan, killing at least 33 people and injuring over 100 after it collided with another derailed train. Rescuers are still struggling to reach trapped passengers, and it's likely the death toll will go up. And this is the fight that everyone has been talking about. YouTube personality Logan Paul managed to survive 8 rounds in the boxing ring against unbeaten champion Floyd Mayweather to the audience's and Mayweather's surprise. The YouTuber's inexperience didn't result in a knockout win. In the end, there was no winner, but Mayweather is expected to walk away with $50 million. Allison, I'll send it back to you.
All right, Simone, thank you so much. Congress back from recess this week with a pretty long to-do list. The biggest ticket item, infrastructure. Will they be able to pull off a bipartisan deal? It's still not clear. Democrat Joe Manchin putting his party in a bit of a bind. NBC News political reporter Alan Smith joins me now in his reporting. Alan, you call Senator Manchin a complicating factor for Democrats on infrastructure and beyond because he hasn't made it clear what, if anything, it would take to support a bill without Republican agreement. So what do you know about Manchin's thinking right now? Where are we on this Monday?
Well, Allison, it looks very similar to what happened with the COVID relief bill, right? Because then Senator Manchin was, repeatedly and to the very end, demanding that the bill be bipartisan, in order to earn his support. But we know that at the end, when push came to shove, and Democrats pursued passing the COVID legislation via reconciliation, Manchin was there at the end of the day. And when you look at this infrastructure package, this is legislation that, particularly in a state like West Virginia, would be very popular. Really, Manchin, he's going to be pushing for this to be bipartisan all the way until really the last possible minute. But you're much more likely to see him vote in favor of infrastructure than some other Democratic priorities that might not be passed along a bipartisan basis.
Alan, fellow West Virginia Senator Shelley Moore Capito is leading the Republican negotiation. Do you say that this makes the situation trickier for Manchin? How so?
Well, with Shelley Moore Capito leading the Republican negotiations, you have a fellow West Virginia senator basically making the Republican argument on infrastructure. And it's one that, Manchin aligns very closely with. I mean, he wants to see this bill pass on a bipartisan basis. And he's got the junior senator from his own state, someone who he has a very good relationship with, leading the negotiations on that. So really what this could come down to is who really is seen, if this is not agreed to in a bipartisan way. If no deal comes about because of this, then really what could make the difference is who is sort of blamed for negotiations falling apart, whether it's the White House or whether it's Republicans led by Senator Capito. And if you listen to Senator Manchin's Sunday show interviews, he makes very clear that he is very happy with Biden at this time and with the way that he's pursuing negotiations. So a lot remains to be seen. But Joe Manchin, that's going to be a vote that you might not know until the last minute.
Yeah, for sure. It seems like he's going to keep everyone guessing for a while. Ellen, you also have some new reporting on Senator Marco Rubio's political future. What's up with him?
Well, right now he's geared up for really what's going to be one of the marquee races in 2022, defending his Florida Senate seat. Val Demings is expected to announce her run soon, one of the top Democrats in the state. But with Senator Rubio, it's something that people have known for a long time. This is a guy who still has his eye on the presidency. And, I spoke with him a couple of weeks ago. He made no secret that he's interested in pursuing the presidency in the future. But it depends on a lot of factors. And of course, we know one of the biggest factors is whether former President Trump decides to run again. But say he doesn't, Senator Rubio has a lot of competition even in his own state from maybe a Ron DeSantis or a Rick Scott. And if you look back to his last run, it obviously remains an open question whether he can gain some of the support among, the party's right-wing base that didn't necessarily break for him in 2016.
All right, Alan, always great to have you on. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
More gun violence in South Florida. Early this morning, 2 people shot and killed near an Air Reserve base. Yesterday, 3 people gunned down at a graduation party. NBC News correspondent Katie Beck has more from Kendall, Florida.
Here in Miami-Dade County, authorities are trying to get a handle on what they're calling a shooting spree, a tragic trend of mass shootings that have been sweeping through the county in recent weeks, the latest one occurring just this morning. Now, this morning there was a shooting at an apartment complex near the Homestead Air Reserve Base that left a woman and teenager dead and injured 3 others. Yesterday, a mass shooting at a graduation party in Kendall killed 3 and injured 5. And on Memorial Day, 2 people were shot dead outside a restaurant on Miami Beach. Additionally, on May 30th, 3 dead and more than 20 people shot in Northwest Miami-Dade. Now, police say this is something they are trying to get a handle on, but obviously struggling as this violence continues to surge. Here's what the head of the Miami-Dade Police Department had to say.
We have to overcome this as a community, as a law enforcement community. It shows that there's a lot of work to be done. We're not going to stop. We're all hands on deck. I mean, this is a setback, without a doubt, it's a terrible tragedy for our community, but that shows you the importance of why we have to have Operation Summer Heat.
Operation Summer Heat is a 12-week initiative to really step up crime enforcement here in Miami-Dade County. They're going to be using officers in all corners of the county to try and do more patrolling, have more boots on the ground, even use social media as a tool to try and see threats ahead of time before they happen. Now, leaders here saying the only way this problem gets solved is as the community bands together and really works to get the violence down.
California's assault weapons ban overturned, a judge calling it unconstitutional. NBC News correspondent Guad Venegas explains the ruling.
Allison, a controversial decision, a controversial ruling, not only because it would overturn a ban that's been in California since 1989, but also because of the language used by the judge, especially when he made a comparison between an assault weapon and a Swiss Army knife. The judge saying, like the Swiss Army knife, the popular AR-15 rifle is a perfect combination of home defense weapon and homeland defense equipment, good for both home and battle. He also adds to say, one is to be forgiven if one is persuaded by news media and others that the nation is awash with murderous AR-15 assault rifles. The facts, however, do not support this hyperbole, and facts matter. We should point out that assault rifles have been used in 11 of 12 of the large mass shootings in the United States. Here in California, of course, an assault rifle was used in the Poway Synagogue shooting, also in the San Bernardino shootings. So there's been a tremendous lashback against this ruling from the governor, from the state attorney. And here in San Diego, where the lawsuit was filed, some advocates or gun advocates were happy with the ruling. Meanwhile, advocates of gun control say they are very worried.
We were successful in making the case that you do have the right to keep and bear arms, that these firearms are not exotic or dangerous, and that they're just like any other firearm and therefore shouldn't be banned.
Most of the major mass shootings are taking place because of these type weapons.
So the judge has given the state of California 30 days to file an appeal. Attorney General Rob Bonta has said they will be filing an appeal. So we expect this to become a legal battle. We do know that the gun advocates that filed the lawsuit intend to take this to the Supreme Court if necessary.
Without the U.S., the Afghan military could lose its biggest advantage over the Taliban, air power. NBC News global security reporter Dan DeLuce reporting that the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan could trigger a game-changing shift in the military balance between the Taliban and the Afghan government, and it could happen in a matter of weeks. Dan joins us now. So, Dan, tell us about the support that U.S. contractors give or have given the Afghan military and how that's about to change.
So the Afghan military completely depends on contractors to repair their planes and helicopters, to repair their armored vehicles, to manage their radios, just about everything. And what's concerning for the Afghans is that there is no new arrangement as to who is going to sustain, maintain, and repair their aircraft and all their other equipment once U.S. troops leave, because all the contractors have to leave under the terms of this deal between the U.S. and the Taliban. And the Afghan government now is scrambling to try to figure out how it's going to keep their aircraft in the air. And without helicopters, without planes, they're really going to lose any kind of edge that they have over the Taliban. And it could be disastrous. So there's a lot of anxiety in Kabul about this.
Dan, you have some new reporting on an unusual statement, if you will, from the Taliban today about the withdrawal. What are they saying?
That's right, Allison. So the Taliban issued a strange statement, really, saying that addressing it to all the Afghans who worked as interpreters and other jobs for the U.S. government in Afghanistan, they said, you don't have anything to fear from us. They said you should express remorse for what you've done, basically suggesting they're traitors. But that, you're not in danger, you have nothing to fear. And of course, human rights groups and anyone who's followed the Taliban really aren't ready to take them at their word. They have a history of hunting down and killing Afghans who worked as interpreters or guards or drivers for U.S. forces in Afghanistan. But it is interesting they're issuing this statement. And they also said that, everything's changed now. U.S. troops are leaving in September, so therefore we as the Taliban have a different perspective on this. But this comes at the same time you have lawmakers appealing and urging the White House to evacuate these Afghans who worked for the U.S. because they're saying these Afghans have a target on their back.
So, Dan, what will happen after September 11th? What kind of support will the U.S. still offer Afghanistan?
So the Biden administration is saying the U.S. will still support Afghanistan, still support the government. We just won't have U.S. troops there. So they've committed to continuing to spend billions of dollars to fund the Afghan police and army. But the problem is if you don't have contractors there to keep the planes and the vehicles running, then that money won't be enough. So now the question is, will the Afghan government and the United States figure out a way to keep all that machinery that, by the way, the U.S. supplied to them to keep it running? So that's the question.
All right, Dan, it's a complex situation. We all have a lot of questions about how things are going to turn out come September 11th. Thanks so much for filling us in.
Thank you.
It's time for The Bottom Line, our daily look at what's going on in the business world and beyond. Here's what's on tap this week. We got a lot. Apple's annual Worldwide Developers Conference, May's Consumer Price Index, Jeff Bezos heading to space, and Tesla ditching plans for its most expensive flagship sedan. CNBC correspondent Rahel Solomon here with more scoop on the busy business week ahead. Rahel, not bad for a summer week. The WWDC, as it's called, usually a really big deal for Apple. This is when the company makes its big software announcements, not its product releases. But tell us, what's different this year? What have they announced so far? How's it going?
Hey, Allison. Yeah, so this year it's virtual again due to the pandemic. But as my colleague Josh Lipton put it this morning on CNBC, Tim Cook has a pretty big job ahead of him. He has to convince developers to keep spending their time and energy to build apps for the Apple platform. But of course, Allison, as you know, the conference follows the Apple versus Epic Games trial, which was kind of tense. Apple essentially saying that developers need them and their platform. So it's a tricky dance for the company. At the same time, we did learn that Apple introduced some new features that continue to expand its commitment to user privacy features. So users will now be able to shut off the feature that lets marketers see if they've opened an email. Allison, good news perhaps for advocates of privacy, probably not good news for developers who depend on those kind of ads. But it is a week-long conference, so more to come here.
Yeah. All right, we will watch that space for sure. All right, Amazon founder Jeff Bezos, he barely led his last annual meeting, and now he's talking about heading into space. What do you know about his travel plans?
Yeah, it's funny. He said, I think on IG that he's been dreaming about going to space since he was a little kid. So it's pretty cool. Quite the news, though. Quite shocking. Jeff Bezos announcing that he's going to be on Blue Origin's first passenger space flight. That's going to happen on July 20th. He's going to be joined by his brother Mark and the winner of an auction. So highest bid, Allison, currently stands at about $2.8 million. And the auction closes in 5 days. So that price could soar even higher. And the Space Tourism System has a New Shepard, as it's called. It's flown more than a dozen successful test flights, but without passengers. So this is why it's so groundbreaking. And also to see an executive be the first is really just interesting. Here's something that's also pretty cool, Allison. It has massive windows, so passengers have great views and even spend a few minutes in zero gravity before returning to Earth. And the date of this launch, July 20th, again, that's the 52nd anniversary of the Apollo 11 moon landing. So even if you're not a space nerd, it's just really cool.
It is very cool. It's also my wedding anniversary. I wonder if I can convince my husband that we should buy tickets on that flight.
I mean, it would be an expensive flight, but it would be a great gift.
We're just slightly priced out. Hey, I have to ask you about Elon Musk. He tweeted today, Plaid Plus is canceled. No need, as Plaid is just so good. For our viewers who don't know, Rahel, what's Plaid Plus and what's going on here?
Yeah, so there's several delays now, right? So Elon Musk announcing via Twitter that Tesla is officially canceling the Model S Plaid Plus. That's a mouthful. So this is the model that promised to deliver 520 miles of range, an acceleration from 0 to 60 in under 2 seconds. And the cancellation does come as automakers continue to grapple with chip shortages and other supply chain issues. But yeah, there had been some delays, and Elon Musk essentially saying yesterday via Twitter that they're just canceling it now.
All right, so we've got the May Consumer Price Index, or CPI, out on Thursday. Why should our viewers pay attention and care about this one?
Yeah, so it matters, Allison, because it's a measure of how expensive things are. And the concern here is that prices are rising too high, too quickly. The forecast call for a 0.4% increase month over month and 4.7% year over year. Now, most on Wall Street and at the Federal Reserve consider inflation to be an issue that ebbs and flows, nothing permanent necessarily. But Deutsche Bank out with a new warning that inflation may persist and even lead to a crisis. Should put a little asterisk on that that's a view that differs from the consensus of many economists. But the bank's chief economist contending that the Fed's intention to not tighten policy until inflation shows a sustained rise. Deutsche Bank saying that that's going to have dire impact. So that's perhaps one more reason to watch that report pretty closely on Thursday, Allison.
And look, even if that opinion is an outlier, right? Every time we all say inflation is probably not going to be a problem, then you hear a report like that and you think, but wait a second, is it?
Yeah, it's not bad, right? To sort of hear the other side so you can kind of just, be cautious.
We're all trying to figure it out. Rahel, thanks so much for showing us what's going on in the business week ahead. We appreciate you.
Always good to be with you, Allison.
COVID cases dropping to new lows across the U.S., but there's a new concern: unvaccinated teenagers getting infected. Here's NBC News correspondent Tom Costello.
Hey, Allison, good day. So the country clearly turning the corner on COVID, but in the South, Tennessee and 5 other states are seeing a slowdown in the pace of vaccinations, below 50%. That's a concern. Meanwhile, the CDC very concerned about an increase in teenagers developing COVID. The good news, and there's plenty, COVID cases have fallen to levels not seen since the early days of the pandemic. The current 7-day average of daily new cases now under 15,000, down 35% from the week before. Hospitalizations also down by 17%. And in New England, the most heavily vaccinated region in the country, there has been a steady drop in hospitalizations.
A year ago, it felt like it was an exceptional case if it wasn't COVID. And now it feels like it's an exceptional case if it is COVID. So it really feels flipped.
With 63% of the nation's adults having received at least one shot, the country is inching closer to the president's goal of 70% by July 4th, though that may be jeopardized by some states falling well below the vaccination rates in the Northeast. Meanwhile, the CDC is stepping up its efforts to get young people vaccinated after a new study found an increase in hospitalizations among teens with COVID in March and April of this year. Nearly a third of 12 to 17-year-olds hospitalized with the virus required ICU admission. 5% needed invasive mechanical ventilation. But according to the study, no deaths were reported, and roughly 70% of the patients had one or more underlying medical conditions. Researchers say the increase in hospitalizations might be related to new variants, plus a larger number of teens now interacting. Later this week, an FDA advisory committee will meet to discuss expanding vaccine access to children under 12. To underscore the risk here of all those people who developed new COVID cases in May, 24% were children.
Cruise ships are docking in Venice again, but they are also causing some waves. NBC News foreign correspondent Claudia Lavanga shows us why some people in Italy don't want them back.
Cruise liners are back in Venice for the first time since the pandemic, but not everyone is on board with it. These protesters say cruise ships are a threat to the city's fragile ecosystem and architecture and want them out of the lagoon.
This is a bit of a David versus Goliath battle. On one side are the protesters who say that Venice was built for small boats like theirs. On the other side is giants of the seas like this cruise liner.
Among protesters is Jane Damosto, an environmental scientist who moved to Venice 25 years ago.
The main issue for Venice is the environmental damage and the destabilization that they cause to the fabric, the built fabric of Venice. The main issue is also the risks of an accident that unfortunately we know only too well is a real risk.
In 2019, a cruise liner rammed into a tourist riverboat and scraped the sidewalk, a near miss that reinforced the protesters' call for a ban. In March this year, the government passed a law that bans cruises from sailing through Venice, but not before an alternative route and berth is found. There is an industrial port on Venice's mainland, but piers will have to be extended and canals dredged. And the new port outside the lagoon will take years and a lot of money to build. In the meantime, cruise liners like the MSC Orchestra will keep coming, like a floating city sailing through another. The news of cruise liners returning to Venice has created shockwaves also far from the lagoon. An impressive list of VIPs recently signed a letter asking for a special law that protects Venice and its historic and artistic heritage. Among their requests, keep cruise ships outside the lagoon, stop over-tourism, limit short-term rentals and tourist shops.
All those people, they signed a letter because they love Venice. I mean, Venice is one of the most beautiful places in the planet, and it's an international city. So you have Biennale Art, the Film Festival, and many other cultural happenings. And so it's quite a big surprise for all of them, and for us too, to see that kind of gigantic, surrealistic vision in the center of Venice that is twice bigger than the Bell Tower of San Marco Square.
But not everyone in Venice want the cruise liners to set sail for good.
It was the Venice community that asked us to come back. It was the governor of Regione Veneto and the mayor of Venice who insisted, for good reason. The Venice community has been hit very severely by the pandemic. We are happy to be back and to contribute to the prosperity of Venice. Our economic impact, not only in Venice, but throughout the entire Adriatic, is incredible.
The Port Authority says the cruise business accounts for 3% of the city's GDP, and 4,000 jobs depend on it. A divisive issue that cuts Venice in half, just like the canal through which cruise liners, for now, will keep coming.
If a Caribbean cruise sounds like the perfect summer vacation, you are in luck. The major cruise lines are heading there again. But some of the COVID rules here in the U.S. are a little bit complicated. NBC News correspondent Stephanie Gosk explains.
Hey there, Allison. Cruise ships are normally a regular sight here on the Hudson River, and they could be coming back soon. The cruise industry has started to set sail again after 15 long months at dock. But a new Florida law that's banning vaccination requirements could make getting back on the water in full force even more of a challenge.
Cruise ships are back at sea. Celebrity Cruises, the first U.S.-based cruise line to bring passengers aboard since the pandemic shut down the industry, setting sail from St. Martin.
We last stepped off of a ship 472 days ago, and that's the longest in my entire life I've gone without being on a ship.
Before boarding, passengers 16 and older were required to show proof of COVID vaccination. Once on the ship, enhanced cleaning protocols are in place. Social distancing is encouraged, but masks are not required. Billy Hirsch is one of the 580 people on board the 7-night Caribbean voyage.
There is a buffet here, but you don't serve yourself. The crew serves you.
With ships already out at sea, one cruise line announced a surprise shift in policy for its U.S. passengers. Royal Caribbean International now says vaccines will be strongly recommended, but ultimately optional for guests on its U.S. cruises, adding those who are unvaccinated or unable to verify vaccination will be required to undergo testing and follow other protocols, which will be announced at a later date. The change goes against CDC guidelines that recommend U.S. cruise ships require passengers to be vaccinated. It also comes as Florida, the nation's largest cruise hub, is set to enact a law that would ban cruise lines and other businesses from asking people to show proof of vaccination or face fines up to $5,000 per passenger. Industry insiders say the new law could force cruise lines out of the state.
This puts the cruise lines in a rock and hard place right now because, one, they're burning millions and millions of dollars a day just having their ships idle.
Back in the Caribbean, passengers are emotional about a sense of normalcy on the horizon.
I'd be lying if I said that there wasn't a moment or two that I thought about crying. It is so far beyond just the excitement of a normal vacation.
A celebrity cruise is set to take sail at the end of this month from Fort Lauderdale. It would be the first cruise to begin from U.S. shores this year, but it's unclear at this point what the new Florida law will do to potentially affect it. Right now, they're requiring everyone for that cruise to be vaccinated.
A royal welcome. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex celebrating the birth of their baby girl, Lilibet Diana Mountbatten Windsor. It's a lot, or Lily for short, a little bit easier. NBC News correspondent Aaron McLaughlin has more from outside the Santa Barbara hospital where she was born.
Hey, Allison. Well, according to a statement released by both Prince Harry and Meghan, both mother and child are doing well and healthy, resting at their home in nearby Montecito. Baby Lily was actually born on Friday at this hospital in Santa Barbara. Her parents kept it a secret for 2 whole days before making the happy announcement on Sunday, saying in part, on June 4th, we were blessed with the arrival of our daughter Lily. She is more than we could have ever imagined, and we remain grateful for the love and prayers we felt from across the globe. Thank you for your continued kindness and support during this very special time for our family. Now, in lieu of gifts, the couple is asking for donations to be made to a list of charities helping women and girls. There's a lot been made of the baby's name, Lilibet Diana Mountbatten Windsor. Now, Lilibet is a nickname for Her Majesty the Queen. It was a nickname she gave herself when she was a toddler because she couldn't pronounce the name Elizabeth. So that's really being seen as a tribute, a nod to the Queen. And then, of course, you have Diana after the late Prince Harry's mother. So touching tribute there in the name. And we're all looking out now for a picture of the baby. No word on when we're going to get our first glimpse of baby Lily. Allison.
Magic wands, Hagrid's boots, and butterbeer. You don't need to get on platform 9 3/4 and head to Hogwarts to find them. The new Harry Potter flagship store now open in New York City. We spoke with some fans waiting in line to see what all the Hufflepuff is about.
We are at the Harry Potter Wizarding World store in New York City. My mom came here at 6 a.m. because I was tired, so I couldn't do it. So she just stood in line waiting for me to get a ticket or a spot.
I got here at 5:45 in the morning, and I waited an hour and a half in line.
When I walked in, I got emotional, and I felt like, and I was like sucking in my tears because I did not want to be like, causing a whole thing, but it was literally one word, as corny as it sounds, magical going in there.
There's not really other stores like this. You can't really
really see anything other than, going into the movies.
It really cheered me up today. I was so stoked. My inner child is so well fed right now. It's not even funny.
There's magic spells, wizards, dragons, like, come on.
Seeing a store like this is so cool because watching the movies, we always wanted to have like those props in our hands. And with this store, we can have our own chocolate frogs and butterbeer. And of course, I could not leave without getting a wand.
I think it's very exciting because it kind of makes it feel like everything's back to normal and that I can enjoy and do things that I like.
Harry Potter has taught me that no matter how bad things get, when you have people around you to help you, things will always be better.
Kind of forget about the whole pandemic while being inside, only because it's just, you're enjoying the moment.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.